like I'd like to welcome everyone. I am super excited to be modding this portion of our sessions today. I am a tea connoisseur. I love tea. I've traveled worldwide just to research and learn and sip on some tea in various countries. Some of my favorites, and Korea, China, of course, South Africa, so India. In India. But tea actually has even more of a significance in my own personal life. In my family, grew up in North Carolina, and so it wasn't tea. Very much would take ingredients and call them up and sip it just like tea. Healing the body. The tea is not just for consuming, it's a method of healing. It's a place where you can come together. I used to have my practice with clients. We have them. I used to see just really medicine. Have conversations. Know what's going on in life. So tea is not just for consuming for to hydrate your body. It's for the mind, body. So let's get started. Today on our panel, we have Dr. Tiffany Elliott, Nishaun Battle, and Dania Wright.
All right, well, good morning, afternoon, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Stephanie Evans, and I am a professor of Black Women's Studies at Georgia State University. And first want to say thank you so much to Dr. Richardson. Nadia and I have been in contact for several years, and I'm so grateful and impressed and blown away by the work that she does with Black Women's Mental Health Institute. And it is an honor to be in this room with people who front and center mental health, especially at a time when we need it most. My area of research is Black women's intellectual history. So basically, I do Black women geeks because I am a Black woman geek. I've always loved books. My husband, Curtis Burke's in the room, he knows. All I do is read and write and read and write. It's my favorite thing to do. So my work in intellectual history is with memoir. And my first book was Black Women in the Ivory Tower, which is the history of Black women in higher education. But as I've risen the ranks of higher education, going from assistant professor to associate professor and full professor, the stress points kept getting a little bit more refined. And so as a tenured full professor, I was supposed to feel great, right? That was not the case. The stress of being a department chair for 12 consecutive years was really putting pressure on me as well. So in 2013, I started to move from intellectual history to mental health. And I engaged a colleague of mine, Kanika Bell. I was at Clark Atlanta at the time, Clark Atlanta University, and we edited this book, Black Women's Mental Health, Balancing Strength and Vulnerability. And so basically, as a historian who studies memoir, I knew my lane. So I reached out to Kanika, who is a clinical psychologist and also a psychology professor. And we engaged Dr. Nsinga Burton, who is a media scholar. And we really got to begin this discussion of Black women's mental health. After that book, I started thinking about how historical practices of mental health can help us today. And I looked at the 2017 APA stress report that said, meditation, music, prayer, yoga, and exercise were all ways that relieve stress. So I looked at those areas in Black women's history. And I came across a picture of Rosa Parks doing yoga. How many of you have seen a picture of Rosa Parks doing yoga? Right, okay. Rosa Parks, the mother of the civil rights movement, not only took yoga, but taught yoga. And so I completed this second book, I told y'all, Black Women's Yoga History, Memoirs of Inner Peace. And the book became about yoga when I ran into that picture of Rosa Parks, because there is so much mental health history, not mental illness history, mental health history that we don't know. And so the cover of the book was Annie Lee. Annie Lee is a famous artist. And along with yoga, there is a Black woman, a picture of a Black woman making tea. So that got me down the rabbit hole. Essentially, we have collaborated to create this forthcoming book. It'll probably be October or November. But I really love collaborating with people because it helps bring forward the actual stories and the robustness of something like tea. So I surveyed Black women's memoirs and found 320 references to tea. For context, there were 140 references to anxiety. There were 50 references to yoga. So in surveying about 500 memoirs, tea was pervasive. Tea was everywhere. And so I started to track tea in Africa, Asia, Europe, Caribbean and South America, and North America. And as Dr. Tiffany just alluded to, there's so much richness globally in how people use tea. And I just remembered that I did not start my timer, so pardon me. I want to make sure to be respectful of time. Okay. Africa. Hibiscus, rooibos in South Africa, senna tea. If anyone has ever taken a smooth move, you know senna tea cleans you out. Yes, we know. Chamomile. In Asia, black or green tea, chai from India, matcha from Japan, lotus tea from Thailand, sencha, of course, Thai iced tea. In Europe, mint, lemon, bergamot, Earl Grey, breakfast. In Caribbean, and these are all teas that Black women mentioned in their memoirs. Arrowroot, orange cannel, cocoa tea. Audre Lorde talked about, cocoa tea. There's also a reggae singer called Cocoa Tea. Hibiscus, sorrel. In North America, ginger, jasmine, chlorella. Rosa Parks talks about using chlorella, which is a green herb tea. Dandelion, raspberry, sassafras. So essentially, I started going down this rabbit hole of trying to understand not only tea and how tea is mentioned, but the uses of tea. And so to keep it short, I found that there's mental health uses for tea, for anxiety and depression, physical health. There are Margaret Charles Smith from Alabama, an Alabama midwife, talks about using tea for fertility control, right? And Doreen Kachanyari, an Aboriginal woman, also talked about how, because there were mass rapes in Aboriginal communities, them wanting to regain an understanding of what their physical health was. There's the beauty. Eartha Kitt talked about using chamomile face peels. The Lady Chablis from Savannah, Georgia, also talked about using chamomile. The opera singer Marian Anderson talked about tea and honey. So there's mental, physical, spiritual tea, whether you're Buddhist or Christian and doing, the pastor and the first lady doing church teas, as for fundraisers, mental, physical, spiritual. There were social teas. Edna Lewis and the long line of chefs and culinary specialists talks about the social uses of tea and holding teas to socialize youth. Social economic tea. Wangari Maathai of Kenya talked about the environmental impact and the economic impact of tea plants and tea plantations on homeland, and then political tea. You have everything from Mary McLeod Bethune, who was, the heft of the National Council of Negro Women. And when Mrs. Bethune called you to tea, you knew there was some serious business getting ready to happen. And then, so there's several, Eartha Kitt got kicked out of the White House, at the White House, a ladies' tea for mentioning some political things. And then, of course, Michelle Obama planting chamomile in the White House, which was summarily ripped up when the next occupant came in. So there's so much range in how people use tea. This book is going to take me certainly 5 years at least, because now I have to go to Japan, I have to go to Kenya, I have to go to, right? I have to go to India, I have to go to all these places. In the meantime, I wanted to begin community conversations to encourage everybody to come to the tea table and to really take serious your tea practice, tea and meditation, for yourself, for your practice, but also for political purposes. Tea is a great organizing tool. And in order to do that, I searched out artists and tea specialists and sociologists to help me with these conversations. And so the book that we're putting is going to be an illustrated tea table book. Oh my God, I'm so excited. It's an illustrated tea table book to begin having discussions about how we use tea for various types of health. So the illustrations, Dania Wright is providing, and she'll talk in just a minute about her work and her creation and her process, and Dr. Nishaun Battle, who is a sociologist and also a criminologist, but works in the community with Black girls in particular, will talk, and she also owns a tea company. So these are the people who I specifically sought out, who were already doing the work in that we needed to bring this research to the community. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. So my name is Dania Wright, and I would consider myself a storyteller and an artist. And I think all of my, there were fireworks going off inside of me with the earlier presentation, because I think the word storytelling was probably mentioned 11 times. And so really sort of underscored or reaffirmed my role in this space. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a practitioner. I'm certainly someone who has been fortunate to learn to invest in caring for my mental well-being. That was not something I grew up with, but after some exposure and coaching, I can't imagine my life without mental health care. I have a therapist, and certainly think about my role as a creative to help continue to remove the stigma around seeking mental well-being and mental health. So just wanted to start off with that. And even before I go into a little bit more of my background, I remember having just a moment of reflection last year, early in the year, and I was writing in a journal, thinking about where I wanted to take my creative practice. And I remember writing down, I want to contribute to or create or be part of projects and initiatives that enhance the lives of people, particularly people who look like me, around the space of wellness and cultural preservation. I just remember writing that down. And I think the next day you called me about this project. So write your intentions down. You'd be surprised at what will happen. It will blow your mind. So a bit about me. I'm an Oakland native. I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia. I would consider myself a multidisciplinary artist. And what that means is I like to express myself creatively using a lot of different forms. So that can be glass art with mosaic and stained glass. I'm an illustrator primarily. I've worked as an animator. I've been an educator of the arts, so working in a K-12 setting as well as an adjunct professor when I lived in Florida. And now these days, I also worked in the corporate space, leading strategic communications, both internal and external. So storytelling is my jam, but art is truly my love. And whenever I can marry those things, it's just delights me. And so with this connection to tea and why, getting the call from Dr. Evans just lit me up was I was thinking about my own physical health journey. So we talked about the mental health piece, which is ongoing. But even physically, just thinking about all of the changes I've made to my diet and, eliminating some of those old habits and, sort of juggling tradition with nutrition. And tea has been a very big component of that evolution. Thinking about how tea has been valuable as part of my womb health care, and learning that from elders and people in the community who have really taken the time to reach back to some of those ancestral practices. And we're starting to see those things reemerge, which really makes me excited. And so I thought that was very timely. But the storytelling piece is important too. And I think about the value of representation in the literary space and academia. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the term that representation matters, and it truly does. I remember learning from this advocacy group back in the San Francisco Bay Area where I'm from called Cane Row, and they were studying, education and the children's literary space. And maybe about years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, the stat was that only 9% of books in the children's literary space feature a primary character of color. So that's 9% of all books around the world. And that's of color, not like Black or African American, but like of color. So you're more likely to see a main character that's an animal than a person of color in children's literature, right? And then even if you look at the medical space, and you all may be familiar with a young Nigerian medical student named Chidiberry Ibe, who, while in medical school, had noticed, as I'm sure some of you have seen some of those medical journals, very overwhelmingly white in representation. And I think scoured over 4,000, for every 4,000 images, only 5% feature diverse shades and colors and representations. And so this student, while in medical school, devoted the little free time that he had to develop just sort of this robust offering of images, like medical, anatomically correct images that feature African Americans or folks of the African diaspora, and then people of other shades as well. And so these are the type of things that I'm mindful of when I'm taking on commissions or different projects. And so knowing that we were going to partner on a book that not only really examined the history, our history, using tea as a healing modality, I knew I had to come through with the imagery. And it didn't hurt that we were featuring these phenomenal women, many of whom I've already known and have deeply respected, but then others that I've just learned about through this project, and being able to highlight obviously their beauty, but then, sort of like demonstrate their strength and just ingenuity and support the work, the research that is in the book. And so what was the process like? It was a lot of, I think, me being able to digest the information and think, okay, so to the average person who isn't a researcher, maybe has an interest in this, what are ways to attract a broader audience? Because accessibility, I think, was a big theme that we all talked about, making sure that this book feels available and accessible to anyone. It doesn't matter if you have, fancy letters behind your name. Really, this is a community led and bred project. And the goal is to really make this sort of a living being, having wisdom circles around this. One of our desires is to have a traveling art exhibition that is inspired by tea, which is something I very much look forward to. And shameless plug, any visual artists or performing artists in this room are virtually joining us. If that's something that piques your interest, please reach out to Dr. Richardson and she can put you in touch with us. So I think that, and I think that pretty much summarizes what I have to share, because I definitely want to make sure that Dr. Battle has some time to talk about her contributions, but very much excited to move this work forward. And also thinking about with the most recent presentation, how do we show up as communicators, visual storytellers to not only share information to the audiences we wish to serve, but leverage them and think about how do we communicate in a way that's meaningful to them, that's relevant. We use the term culturally sensitive or culturally responsive. But it just reminds me of that quote, nothing about us without us. And so as a communicator day to day, I'm always thinking of how do I leverage the expertise of the communities, the groups that we aim to serve, and really amplify their voices. Don't speak for them, but really just be a vehicle or a megaphone for them. And so honored to be able to sit in that role and looking forward to having further discussion with you all.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Dr. Nishaun Battle, and I am an associate professor of criminal justice at Virginia State University. And I'm also an author of a book entitled Black Girlhood, Punishment and Resistance, Reimagining Justice for Black Girls in Virginia. And so my doctorate is in sociology, certificate in women's studies, but primarily most of my work after I graduated with my doctorate has been in the criminal justice atmosphere, and essentially studying the ways in which state violence has impacted Black girls specifically, and the response and care from Black women to create spaces of social justice for Black girls. And so what that work looked like was actually really diving into historical archives and court cases, and looking at organizations with Black club women and the role that they played in the uplift of Black girls, and just essentially the spaces and institutes that were created that would provide a space for Black girls to thrive. And so essentially my book really in the beginning part is looking at early 20th century work by Black club women such as Janie Porter Barrett and the institute that she created with the Virginia Industrial School for Colored Girls. And the reason why that institute was established was because early 20th century, you would have Black youth, both girls and boys, being housed with adults if they were sentenced in prison. And so Janie Porter Barrett heard of this case where an 8-year-old little girl stole a lollipop, and they were going to sentence her to 6 months in prison, in an adult prison. And so when she went down there, she said, I will take the girl and essentially put her in this home. The judge allowed it, but he previously thought that it was a white woman named Janie Porter Barrett. And so once they arrived at the court, it apparently was likely too late to try to change up the decision on sending the youth to prison. And so he allowed the little girl to go with Janie Porter Barrett. And from there, more girls would enter this institute. And the approach that she took was well-being, gardening, drinking tea, and essentially allowing them to identify who they were, and self-development. And so that has been the area for probably close to 6 to 7 years that I've been researching state violence in Black girls. And so I was leaving a conference was at the airport. It was the NWSA, National Women's Studies Association. And so I run into the superstar, Dr. Evans, who I've cited extensively in my work. And so, I see her and I'm like, hi, I've used your work. I love your work. And she's being very humble with these 2 books because she has several more. And so I will never forget, she looked me deep in my eyes and she said, okay, you have your book and I know what you have to do in academia for tenure. She said, but what is your passion? I don't know how she knew that really wasn't my passion, but I just felt like it was something that she just knew. And she said, what do you really want to do? And I said, I really want to study wellness and well-being. I still want to look at creative spaces for Black girls, but in the vicinity of wellness. And so that's what I started doing. And I remember she said, well, then that's what you should do. And after she said that, I said, okay, that's what I'll do. So I started, just that simple. And so I started working with nonprofits in the Richmond, Virginia area, both as a consultant and as a volunteer, to just essentially, be in spaces where Black girls could thrive. But it was right around 2019 where I started suffering with womb issues, endometriosis, fibroids, and I wanted a natural alternative to address those issues. And so I started seeing a naturopathic doctor. And I remember she put me on a raspberry leaf tincture and other tinctures and things of that nature. And so I noticed a difference. And so then I started studying herbalism. And it was like a 2-year program where I received a certificate in herbalism. And then I said, I want to start sharing this with other Black women and women of color, because we disproportionately are impacted with these issues. And so I also wanted it to be a holistic wellness experience for Black women and women of color and women of any race who were allies of social justice for Black women and girls of color. And so I thought, maybe I should start hosting tea parties. And then I noticed that was a catalyst for several healing discussions that arose, at tables just like this over drinking tea.
That's right.
And shortly after, Dr. Evans reached out to me and she said, I'm working on this book with Black women, wellness, and tea, and I would like you to be a part of it. And I said, okay, thank you. And it was great because I realized not only with the womb issues that I was facing, but it was also a lot of stress in academia. And so I also wanted to see what are some things that I enjoy doing outside of academia that will also help me with my self-care, because being on tenure track, and I finally received tenure, I want to say early 2020, but that was very, thank you. It was a real, stressful journey, but one that, I completed, and now I'm still in academia teaching, but I'm also a wellness educator and self-care coach, and I am enrolled currently in a wonderful yoga program with the Well Collective in Richmond, Virginia. And so at the end of the year, I'll be a certified yoga teacher.
Yes,
and that is the path that I am really moving towards, is engaging in healing circles, yoga, and how I can help bring that to other academics who may be facing the same challenges that many academics do when they are in the ivory tower. And so what the book has done for me, I own Lady Rose Specialty Teas. I customize various herbal loose leaf blends for you to drink, but also I have yoni steams, I have herbal hair rinses. And so you can experience the tea in whatever way suits you. And my contribution to the book was to provide descriptions of the benefits of what the various herbs can do for your body in healing. And I'm very happy to be here and share in discussion with any questions that you have. And of course, happy to always be with my wonderful tea sisters.
Yes.
So I would like to kind of start off the discussion with, could you provide us with some information, any of you, specifically how tea can or has been influential for Black women, and especially their mental health?
I'll share one quote that I think captures the culture, right? It's a global tea culture. But Rita Marley, in her No Woman, No Cry, My Life with Bob Marley, her memoir, she wrote, "These days, everyone tries to copy what we were promoting back then as the Rasta lifestyle. Vegetarianism, organic food, exercise. I suppose that does or doesn't include the smoking of herb. As we see it, it's a God-made plant, just like the other herbs in the garden. And there are, of course, much publicized medical uses for glaucoma and pain relief. As for me, I've always used marijuana as a sacramental food. Whenever I felt as if I wanted to do the right thing the right way, or say the right thing at the right time, I have a puff or a cup of tea. It's good for my meditation. It has its use, but of course, anything that you overdo can be harmful. I prefer to use it just as another plant from the garden." And I think this is an example of how there's tea, which is Camellia sinensis, right? That's the tea plant that comes from China. And then there's tisanes, which are all of the other herbs, like rooibos tea from South Africa, the various plants or bushes or things like that. Listen, I know I'm not the tea expert, but I'm just saying what I read. But there are ways that tea soothes, and that can be physical and have like the actual physiology of what the tea is doing. But Mary Seacole, who was a Jamaican nurse who, during the time of Florence Nightingale, wanted to go over to support the troops in the Crimean War, but was turned away. She went anyway. She owned a tea house in Panama and used tea to soothe the wounded soldiers in the hospital. So there's the physicality of what herbs can do, but there's also the mental release of, someone said, well, I was suffering through my graduate program and my mom fixed me a pot of tea to help me get through writer's block, right? So there are various ways that the spiritual aspect of it comes through in the narratives.
Well, just to add to that, the tea ritual within itself is a mental health tool that you can use. And when I say tea ritual, using loose leaf herbs, scooping the herbs up, smelling the herbs, putting it into the steeper, pouring the hot water, all of those different steps literally are a part of the self-care. And then when it gets to the point where you're now actually taking a sip of the tea, we say, take each sip slow, like take your time. We don't have to be in a rush society, which we often, are accustomed to in this capitalist society. And so when you have that tea time, that is your time to honor yourself and to honor your body and to just take a moment for your mental health. I will say that herbs are not gendered. And often when we hear of herbs, we're like, oh, well, raspberry leaf, that'll tone your uterus, or saw palmetto, that's for prostate, and all of this. So herbs are not gendered. They are proactive, and they're full of minerals. They are all anti-inflammatory in nature. I know most people are like, oh, turmeric is good for reducing inflammation, and that is true. But herbs within itself will help with that as well. And so back on how they can help you with mental health, herbs like chamomile, people might think, well, that's a easy tea that we see in the grocery store. But if you steep an herb for a minimum of 4 hours, it now becomes medicinal. And so now you have the chamomile in your body that's relaxing your mind, relaxing your soul and spirit, and can also help if you have sleep problems as well.
And more specifically, are there any particular blends that you would necessarily maybe recommend that people could start using that are easy to, like for myself, I actually grow lemon balm, and because it's really easy to grow and it grows very fast. and I use it to make teas. I use it in my bath as a ritual for bath rituals. So do you have any other recommendations?
Well, yes. One, I would say please visit www.ladyroseteas with an S at the end.com. And each of my blends, I literally describe what the herbs can do for you. Lemon balm, peppermint, chamomile, those are good for insomnia, but they can also be good for your uterus as well. They can also be good for men's health. So herbs are really intelligent, and when they enter your body, they know like what organ do I really need to, shift to. What are some other St. John's wort when people are facing depression? They often will go to that. Now that's another one that if you are taking medication, you don't want to drink that tea at the same time because it will push out your medicine. But there are hundreds and hundreds of herbs. So a good start is my website, because I want to make sure that I'm educating people and not just selling a tea to them. I want them to know this is how this can help you. Thank you.
Go to the website.
And one thing I also want to share in addition to another website I will refer, which is hellatea.com, and that is a Oakland, California based Black women-owned tea business that also focuses on sort of educating the consumer about, yes, this tea is delicious, but also here are some of the properties that enhance your health. And another outcome that I love about this project is we have had the privilege of connecting with so many other sisterpreneurs, teapreneurs in the U.S. and I believe a few abroad. And so, we have a site, and we'll share all of that information at the end of our presentation, where we are highlighting these enterprises as well. So, yes, certainly an opportunity to fellowship around tea, but then also there's an economic development component as well.
Because I kind of want to move into that and the not socialization, but the social political. I remember when I was in India, I visited a plantation, and it was a collective of all these women working the plantation. And what I found out was back years ago, these women were instrumental in getting women's rights, so getting insurance and correct labor pay. And that wasn't very popular in India at the time, but on those tea collectives, they were getting their proper pay, they were getting insurance, spaces for their children to be in a safe area. So I would like to talk about how tea has been an economic source for women and has been a social call, not social political call for women.
So there's a Global Tea Academy at the University of California, Davis, that I was invited to give a talk at, and they have an international network of tea professionals and that this was so important to me because, as was mentioned, like in this capitalist society, we are all about making money and selling things, and really don't think about where does this tea come from? What labor was involved in planting, picking, processing, shipping, and like, what does that dollar look like? Where does it go? How is this impacting? And so the first question we need to ask is this responsibly sourced, right? And who is this benefiting? And there's all sorts of questions that we have about water use, right? Water usage that we have or don't have, who has access to all these things. So that's an essential part of where we start the conversation of what it means to bring people to the Africana Tea table. What does it mean to say we're doing Africana? We're looking at tea in the African diaspora. That means that we have to ask questions about how this impacts women in labor. But even though I focus on women, there is a very rich tradition of men and tea, and men in politics and tea, and men and religion in tea. W.E.B. Du Bois, who is, one of the founding fathers of Black studies and Black community studies, worked for A&P, and he was a tea seller, right? Or he worked for A&P as they were getting ready to be a grocery store, and he wrote to them years later because their Harlem stores would not allow Black people to work there, right, or to purchase tea in certain ways. And so there's always been a relationship of how tea, and if you go to Morocco, if you go to Senegal, Malcolm X talked about the tea practice when he went to Mecca, right? And the men's spaces that are created and the political talks that are created in spaces that are cultivated and curated and can be. So it's about what's in the cup, but it's about how what's in the cup got there and what we can do as an organizing tool. The Club Women's movement was so important, not just in the early 20th century, but we're all members of sororities, right? So the sororities, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority incorporated, had these lovely teas during the civil rights movement. We put on our little gloves, but if you go in the archives and look at the Ivy Leaf, where did that money go? Bail money to get, who was bailing all the people out who got arrested during the civil rights movement? Right? So there is, I would like to propose, is Dr. Richardson in the room? Is Nadia in here? She's outside working. I would like to propose this as a site for the Alabama tea movement.
I love
right?
it. Yeah.
Come on now.
Yeah,
We've got, I have an agenda. My ancestors sent me here. I'm not just here on my own behalf. I do think that there is a way that, the Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party, has been co-opted and usurped for political purposes, right? But what they're not telling you, or what most people don't know, is that in 1773, on that Dartmouth boat that they were throwing tea off of, Phyllis Wheatley's book was on that boat, right? It had just been published in London and on that same boat. So there is a deep history of how we can access tea to understand the political potential. And what would it look like for everybody in this room and the political panel that was here earlier to say, we're going to sit down, especially at this critical time in this country's history, where people aren't talking to each other and AI is, people are purposely spreading misinformation, to invite people to a tea table and say, we're going to talk at the tea table. We're going to make this a thing. I was listening to the first panel. I was like, ATM, Atlanta Tea Movement. That's what we're here to do. Yes. Right? That there is infinite possibility if we take inspiration from the ancestors and the elders.
Okay, so now I would like to take this time to offer to the floor. Are there any questions? Yes.
I want to say thank you. It's a great topic. I didn't really know what to expect when I read the title, but I grew up in a home that was homeopathic, and my mom had a binder of teas. And so our medicine when we were sick was going in this binder, finding what the issue was, finding the tea, going in the cabinet and making the tea, and then reading the contraindications, what teas you couldn't mix together and things of that nature. And so, that was a practice that has stayed with me. It's in my practice. When my clients come, they have options to get, lemon ginger tea or peppermint tea or chamomile tea based on how they feel, adding essential oils with the tea. But I think it is a really important conversation for us to recognize there are different forms of medicine and different forms of healing. And although we as mental health clinicians cannot push medication, we can push information and access to other avenues for well-being, right? And so I want to thank you for pushing this, because I don't think we realize how rich our history is when it comes to herbal medicine and how healing it has been for us. During COVID, I took the time to become a hydroperistemist, which is a yoni steamer. And I learned so much just learning about how to mix herbs. I learned a lot about myself and how to heal my body and different medical issues I was having related to my menstrual cycle. And so I think it's an important conversation and an important narrative for our communities, because it's not a conversation we all always have access to. So thank you for that. One thing I want to know is how we can support the work that you do, and how we are able to bring this information to our communities. What's the best way to really help you push your agenda, or push your vision and goal for your project?
The best way to support, from my perspective, because we each have equal partnership in the work, but from my perspective, the best way to support this work is to support Nadia Richardson. Right? I've asked her to write the foreword for the book for a purpose, because there's so many people who like to be in charge of stuff, right? Like, I started a movement of da-da-da-da. I just look around and see who's already doing the work, right? Instead, as you said, instead of speaking for people, amplify the voices of the people who are, so we're putting this book out and asked Dr. Richardson to write the foreword, because this is where it starts, right? This is the intended audience are people who are mental health workers. The way to, so it's basically just, how can we support you?
And in these last couple of minutes that are left, I would like for each of you to please offer up how everyone can reach you and follow your work.
Sure. All things under the banner FluffyJo, which is not only the name of my studio, it's actually my nickname that my great grandmother gave me. And that is spelled FluffyJo. So FluffyJo.com, @FluffyJo on Instagram, on all the things. And I look forward to connecting with all of you.
On my website is LadyRoseTeas.com, but also the wellness website is drnishaunbattle.com, and the spelling of my name should be in the flyer, but Nishaun. On Instagram, it is Dr. Nishaun T Battle, and I think that's about it for social media.
And I'm at professorevans.net, professorevans.net, and there you'll find links to all the things, as well as the Africana Tea network. So we've developed a network of researchers, of community activists, tea professionals, and artists. So if you're interested in entering in these conversations, that's where you can find the information. And thank you again, Nadia.
And I would like to end this by just asking each of you to be intentional in starting a tea practice for yourselves individually, and then for your family and the community at large, and using tea as an intentional effort to make political and social change, and not just health change. And I made a little acronym, playing around with it, but I kind of thought, transform actual emotion, or transforming and taking action of emotions, or we can make emotions just like emotional for the whole community, right? So how can we, as a group of people, as mental health clinicians, be transformative by using tea? So that's how I would like to leave it. Thank you for your time. Thank you to the panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
you.